Hi, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us today. We're excited that you're on. This is Emergn's webinar series. It's designed around our customers and their customers who want to share their successes and the lessons learned. Today, we're proud to have Vistaprint with us to talk about how they slash their concept to cash cycle. I believe many of our guests will know Vistaprint as an established leader in e-commerce. Vistaprint is one of the core brands under the Cimpress family of companies. And joining us from Cimpress today is JP Baudry. JP is the Senior Director of Technology at Cimpress. JP is also an engineering leader and an Agile coach, and he leads the enterprise Agile transformation, technical operations, and release management for the billion-dollar-plus company Vistaprint, again, which is a line of business under the Cimpress family of companies. My name is Alex Adamopoulos. I am the Chief Executive Officer for Emergn. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to pass it off to JP, and he's going to take you through Vistaprint's journey on this topic. JP, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. So indeed, the promise here today for you is to learn a little bit about how Vistaprint went about slashing its concept to cash cycle. Before we launch into talking about an Agile transformation, I think it would be helpful to frame a little bit who Vistaprint is, what it does, and give you a sense of scale and complexity so that you can figure out if this is similar at all to what you deal with in your own Agile transformation. So as Alex pointed out, Vistaprint is a global e-commerce company. We sell custom printed products. Our typical customer is a micro business, of which we have 16 million worldwide in our customer base. Vistaprint is traditionally known for its business card line of product, but you might be surprised to learn that now in 2017 we have well over 100 different lines of products, spanning the gamut from what you see here on the slide. To bring all of this to market, we are supported by 5,800 employees spread across 26 locations. And from an Agile standpoint, what I think is interesting here is to think about the value stream. What are all the different specialisms necessary to bring this value to our customer base? Of course, we have the typical complement of IT skills necessary to build an e-commerce website, right? Software development, creative, people who do graphic design, copywriting, because we sell in many different locales around the world, marketing, obviously, analytics, and the typical support functions of HR, finance, legal, and whatnot. What is interesting about Vistaprint is we also have a world-class customer support organization that ranks in the, employs multiple thousands of people. And they not only answer questions for our customer base, but also provides design services and advice to our customers. Moreover, Vistaprint owns its own manufacturing. So we have a large number of manufacturing wizards who turn these customer concepts into high-quality, amazingly affordable products in our plants. And so when we think about slashing the concept to cash lead time, what we're talking about here is really this entire value stream, and that is the ambition of our Agile transformation. So let's get right into it. We promised to share the approach. Well, there it is. Let me rifle through that fairly quickly. So the way we've gone about it over the last 4 years is that we decided to work with the willing first. That's what we call the pull, and to defer confrontations or debate with folks who are not convinced yet that agility is the right approach. We always start conversations with talking about principles instead of practices. We feel that once people are armed with principles, they can make pretty good decisions around the specific practices they want to be adopting. We chose depth over breadth, meaning that we want to get to results with some teams before we engage with all teams. When we do engage with a team, we lead with education, and you'll see how Emergn plays a huge role here. When we talk to teams, of course, our group of people who lead the transformation, we talk about experiments a lot, experimenting around how we work. We don't deploy a decree or a specific method across the enterprise. From the principles above, you can see that we attempt to use Agile on Agile, meaning that we try to be as incremental, delivering value, and using a lot of feedback on our own transformation. And then perhaps the most important thing is we're not engaging into this global transformation simply because we want to be agile. We're doing it because we want to see differentiated business outcomes. And that drives the key performance indicators that we track in our transformation and how we make decisions about where to engage and where to engage later. And so that's it. That's the money slide. So for those of you who just wanted to get the bottom line, now you've got it. But for those of you who are curious to see about how these things become real in the Vistaprint environment, well, keep listening a little bit longer. Let me give you a sense of timeline. We decided that we wanted to become agile in early to middle 2013. At the time, Vistaprint had grown a lot, right, from its relatively modest beginnings to now being in a place where we had thousands of employees, a good amount of revenue, and the dissatisfaction was centered around the fact that it was taking longer and longer to turn brilliant ideas into customer value. And after a fair amount of research, we decided that agility was one of the things that was going to help us out and accelerate, again, our delivery of value to market so that we can remain competitive and even lead the pack. So at the time, we formed a very small transformation team comprised of 4 people. We hired Emergn, and we started coaching, and I'll get into that in more details later. Approximately a year after that, on the strength of some early results that we got, the Agile transformation became a strategic priority at Vistaprint. The transformation became mandatory in technology while remaining optional in other functions. In the middle of 2015, one of our coaches got a first major success outside of a pure technology environment, and I will detail that a little bit later. A year after that, in the middle of 2016, again, on the basis of the success that we've achieved to date, Vistaprint made a commitment to agility across all functions. And today, actually starting a couple of months ago, we are now in our 3rd iteration of an enterprise-wide work visualization that we call an enterprise Kanban. And it is now a process owned fully by people who have delivery responsibilities, meaning that it is not driven by any agile coaches or transformational agents. So this gives you a little bit of sense of where we come from, how long we've been at it, and some of the high-level milestones that we've achieved. So here we are at the very beginning of the transformation. It's 2013. We have just a few people inside the company who have experience and expertise driving lean and agile transformations. We're also very conscious of the complexity of the value stream at Vistaprint, and so we figure out that we need a partnership with some other experts to help us bootstrap our effort. We talked to a lot of people and eventually selected Emergn for a number of reasons. First, when we started to talk to Alex and his team, we realized very quickly that we had a shared set of beliefs for how these transformations should take place. We also love the fact that Emergn has deep expertise that includes software but is not limited to software. And finally, we love the fact that while they can absolutely help us learn and train on things like Scrum and Kanban, they are not just a method vendor. It's really a holistic approach that encompasses the entirety of the value stream. So we really love that. And so immediately we start to build a relationship. We started to work with some of the master coaches, to work with our teams, start to develop coaching talent internally. And in the process, we also selected the value flow quality curriculum to, again, help us accelerate the transformation and to really provide the educational foundation to our effort. The reason we chose value flow quality as a curriculum are numerous, but some of them is that we love the fact that it's really principle and outcome based, right? Nobody really disagrees with delivering value early and often and then optimizing the flow to deliver faster and getting a better sense of where you stand through faster feedback loop. This is something that was universally adopted as something beneficial for us to pursue. We also like the fact that VFQ is very modular and that has some very beneficial attributes when you want to help teams become better educated. and it's really, really comprehensive. At the risk of sounding overly enthusiastic about VFQ, I would say it is certainly, in my personal experience, the best curriculum that I have seen. So on the strength of this partnership and the value flow quality curriculum, we set about to flesh out what our educational stance was going to be. Right? So I said at Vistaprint, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different specialisms, we have a lot of different topics, we didn't have a ton of educators, and we have to figure out, okay, how will we build more bench depth in Lean and Agile so that we're not necessarily always bottlenecked by how many coaches we have. So one of the cornerstones of our educational approach is what we call the value flow quality pathways. These pathways are really blended learning programs that we've created. They tend to be 10 to 16 weeks in length, so they're very intensive. Right? They demand a very significant time commitment from people. We do them in cohorts of people that we try to do the right blend of people who have worked together and people who otherwise should probably build stronger relationships. And we've fine-tuned them, meaning that we've evolved topics, customized them based on the kind of people that we're educating. Of course, all of our Agile coaches go through a deep VFQ pathway so that they become value flow quality experts. We also have pathways for what we call makers, right? The people with the hands-on keyboard with the various skill sets. And we've customized some for product owners and also senior leaders and executives. To date, we've piped well over 100 people through those, through a dozen cohort plus and counting. So in fact, we have one cohort who's going to finish this afternoon and a few more that will be kicking off in the upcoming weeks. The pathways are not the only method that we use to educate people. We, of course, supplement that as is needed with specific technique training. Sometimes teams will say, you know what, we feel like we understand the basics of Scrum for those teams who have chosen Scrum, but maybe you can help us out be more effective with sizing. Or a different team might say, we have this fantastic idea, how do we slice it into smaller increments to get feedback faster? And so perhaps we'll teach them with either value stream mapping or story mapping and so forth. So we have a fairly comprehensive library of education that we provide to people. And then lots of teams will choose to do self-directed learning through the typical book club. And here I want to give a shout out to Sharon Bowman and her work in her book, Training from the Back of the Room. And the reason I want to give her a shout out is because you can have the best curriculum in the world, but if your delivery is dull and boring, people won't learn anything. And here we were really able to jazz up our training and really help our coaches connect better with learners through Sharon's material. And so we used to have pretty good training that we developed in-house, but we still felt like we were talking at people perhaps more than we really wanted. And so after the coaches did a book club on this book, it has really transformed how we do education and delivery, so more so that now our training is always super well attended, the feedback is awesome. So I cannot, as much as VFQ is fantastic and I recommend it, I recommend this kind of mindset and training from the back room just as well. It is the perfect pairing between the two. So I said in the timeline that we started with a very modest team, circa 2013, as we launched this transformation. And that in the middle of 2016, it became an all-in commitment to agility across a Vistaprint. And so the challenge for us was, how do we scale our transformational efforts? Right? Obviously, it can't scale linearly with the number of people involved because it would become really unaffordable. But so we've essentially leveraged 3 different employee population in different roles, and let me explain them briefly. Of course, we have our traditional Agile coaches. Some were hired externally, coming in with a lot of background and experience, and some were formed internally. And the way we operate, of course, is I mentioned that every one of them becomes an expert in value flow quality, and the more senior coaches master coach the more junior ones. And so at Vistaprint, when we first started the team of Agile Coach, we asked for volunteers. 7 people raised their hands. And then over the course of the next 18 months, we discovered some difficult realities. What I mean by that is through the typical corporate reorgs, promotions, attrition, and so forth, we realized that having people who play this role in a part-time basis while maintaining a full-time job really had a hard time juggling the two. And we went from 7 coaches down to 1 in a span of 18 months. Today, we're back at 10 coaches. So the good news here is that we became really proficient at training and educating those coaches. Yet there is still a role for people who are part-time and have a passion for this kind of topic. And we've discovered many, many such people who are super eloquent, really passionate, but have a delivery commitment to make. And we call those people champions. And we formed communities of champions in our various offices. They're supported by coaches. And those folks essentially are able to provide great influence in their circle of stakeholders, but are not free to redeploy and to go work with teams at a very deep level, especially not teams outside of their immediate roles. Today, we use those champions to help us with the broad-based training that we want to have. For example, if a team needs a facilitator for retrospective, some of our champions are really proficient at that. If a team needs help with just learning Agile basics, because maybe they're just starting their own transformation, our champions can provide that training. When we feel like we have enough new hires that it is worth rebaselining what people know and their basic education, we call upon champions as well. The third type of persona that we've been leveraging a lot these past few years is what we call Agile facilitators. Some of you will know them as Scrum Masters, but because not all of our teams have chosen Scrum as their method or practices, we call them facilitators. It has over time evolved into a full-time role where now the facilitators form a very strong guild so that they can refine their craft. One of the biggest difference between facilitators and coaches is the fact that facilitators are assigned to teams on a relatively permanent basis, and they have a strong focus on team health and delivery. Whereas the job of a coach is to bootstrap the effort, provide the support, but then get out, right, so that they can go and plant the seeds of transformation elsewhere. I said earlier that one of our transformational principles is to go deep before we go broad, and I think that it's probably worth explaining a little bit. First, what does it mean to go deep? So when a coach engages with a team, one of the first steps, regardless of the team's request, is to do an assessment. What is the current state of affairs in that team? What are the opportunities to make things better? Who are the people involved? What is the nature of the work? And from that assessment, the coach will pull together a recommendation for some next steps. And then it's all about getting management support, because you can't get to differentiated results by doing the same old thing. So something's going to have to change, and it's important for managers to understand what's happening, to be comfortable with the level of change, and to promote it as something important. Once we have that, the coach will then set out to put together with the team an education vision, because we want people to not just blindly follow what the coach is saying, but to really be able to challenge and argue and make choices. And then at about the same time, we want the team to start to craft an experimental backlog for how they're going to change their methods of working with one another. All of that takes place over the course of several weeks, sometimes months. We like the coach to be part of that team on a daily basis, to be able to catch interesting learning events right in the moment. And then, of course, on a regular basis, we want the coach, the team, and the management sponsors to get together, review the results, and then figure out what the next increment of transformation should be in that space. All right, so that's the theory of going deep, right? Because the results is what we're all after. Let me provide you with an example of such a result. I called out that in the middle of 2015, we had our first deep result in a non-technology space, or traditional technology, I should say. Let me expand on that just a little bit. one of our coaches started to engage with a team that is responsible for making and producing email campaigns, right? Email is a vehicle by which our customers learn of our offers, sales, and so forth. And at first, you might be thinking, well, what's so sophisticated about an email that you need to optimize the value stream? Well, our emails are sent to millions of people. They're also multilingual. So they requires a lot of copywriting, translation, and so forth. Just the sheer operational complexity of sending millions of emails also requires a specialized team there with tooling. We also want to gather testing results from the effectiveness of those emails. So we have a lot of analysts that are involved in the multivariate testing that pertain to that. And to make sure that our emails provide value to our customers, the content of the emails is also dynamic, meaning that customers will see text and imagery related to their previous purchases in there. And so that also adds quite a bit of complexity around dynamic graphics and tapping into our customer relationship management information and so forth. Anyway, the point is that at the time where the coach got engaged with that value stream and with those people, it took about 40 days between the moment that the business decided, you know what, we would like to have a campaign around XYZ topic, and the day that the email went out, so about 40 days. After a few months of engagement and following the process that's on the left side of the slide, the coach and the team, or I should say the team, because the coach is still not producing emails, the team brought that down to 15 days. At that point in time, our coach felt comfortable that the team was educated enough, knowledgeable enough, and had honed their continuous improvement process enough to disengage from the team. That team, though, of course, kept optimizing what they were doing by bringing other members of the value stream in the conversation around changing how they work, and that led to results in the fall that were 7 days from the earlier 40 days for a reduction of more than 80% in the lead time. So that was one of the key results that help us get credibility and traction outside of traditional software development, if you will. That is the reason why we favor going deep first before going broad. Of course, as we change the way we work, right, changing the mindset, changing the rituals, changing the things that we looked at, moving away from debates, doing more experimentations to resolve, doing fewer business cases and more looking at early market results instead, right, through faster feedback loops. It also changed how we were organized. This is potentially a bit complex, but I kind of want to summarize two high-level topics here. First of all, some of our roles have evolved. For those of you who have been at the transformation for a while, you won't be surprised to see that the doers, the makers, have started to develop broader skill set, right? This supports teamwork and swarming. We introduce a role called product owners. They are the people who prioritize the work and are responsible for market results. Of course, facilitators and scrum masters have emerged as something that was needed and that we wanted. A consequence of all of that and the changes in the way that we work is that we have many, many fewer project managers that we once did. And those that remain now use facilitation as a primary mode of working instead of the more traditional intermediation where they are the sort of the messenger between people. And our managers are now doing the best that they can to act as servant leaders. From an organizational standpoint, you're going to see things that you might have seen elsewhere. So where once we were a large collection of individual contributors, we now have organized around squads, cross-functional squads, or sometimes we call them rainbow squads, where each color represents a different skill set. Those squads that operate in the same or similar domains are grouped into tribes. Over the more recent past, as we have started to connect our strategic objective more tightly with the squad work, we've come together in outcome teams, meaning different squads of different tribes get together to pursue a very focused outcome. This means that we are also operating with a ton of self-organization. That's really, really important. A lot of these squads and tribes get together and figure out for themselves what the best way to attack the work is. And then we currently have several experiments around self-management, meaning teams who are operating without an officially designated manager, but where that role is actually distributed across the team members. And then we will see where that takes us. If you recognize some terms here that you've heard from other companies before, that is not a coincidence. We will do absolutely everything we can to make our transformation a success, and we will shamelessly borrow the best ideas from wherever we can find them. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank all the thought leaders in Lean and Agile who over the years have shared their results with the public, and we are eternally grateful to benefit from their journeys. I mentioned in the timeline that we are now in our third iteration of an enterprise-wide Kanban board, and I wanted to quickly dispel notions that this must be a highly sophisticated tool. I think it is sophisticated in spirit, but as you can see here, it's actually really comprised of light boards and sticky notes. But it is an unbelievably powerful tool. It exists in our large offices. It is in a very public space, and what the stickies represent is strategic outcomes for the company. And what this allows to do is to have conversations around the amount of work in progress that we have, the flow that we're experiencing, whether these things have value, and just as importantly, it allows every team member anywhere to connect what they see on their own team board, which is highly granular, and to trace that work all the way back to a strategic priority. Or, if they can't, to ask some darn good questions as to why they're working on the things that they're working on. All right. So far, I've talked a lot about the principles of our transformation and how we've gone about it. But I did say that we're doing all this for the purpose of getting to better business outcomes. So have we? Well, again, we measure ourselves, our success, by the lead time. And I provided a small example for a relatively small team that produces emails. And so here you have a representative value stream. And I said that we had some disappointment back in 2013 for how slow and sluggish we had become. And let me characterize that a little bit. At the time, we were operating with an annual planning cycle. And so if a great idea was discovered just after the planning cycle had concluded, that it had to wait for the next one, then we would spend a few months in planning, then perhaps the scheduling of that initiative wouldn't happen for some months still, and then you had to go through the typical execution. So we did a survey of a large number of past projects at the time to get a baseline, and it was very typical for our projects to take 18 to 30 months or more between ideation and customer value delivery. And of course, nobody was happy about that. So the big question, where are we today? Well, I'm very happy that for some of our value streams, and I want to be clear that it is not all of them, there's still very much a lot of work to be done for us, but for some of the value streams that we focused on strategic initiatives, our fastest ones are now have a lead time of 3 weeks, and we're really, really happy with that. And the work ahead for us is to try to replicate those results across more value streams in the company. And on this note, that concludes the prepared part of this conversations. And Alex, if you're okay with it, why don't we turn it over to our audience for some questions?
That sounds great, JP. Thank you very much. That was excellent. We do have some questions that have come in, so we can take just a few more minutes. I'll ask you, and if you want to provide some brief responses. And if we don't get all the questions answered, please continue to submit them, and we will get you a response after the webinar. So one of the first ones that we have here is, how do you convince executives to try new ways of working?
What an awesome question. For me, it starts with asking them if they're satisfied with the current state of affairs. Because if there is no dissatisfaction, then we should not be surprised that there is no willingness to try something that at the outset can appear a little bit scary. And so this is where the assessment, right? We talked about the different coaching steps with teams, but that can be done at the organizational level to look at the current state of affairs. And once a map is painted of the current state of affairs, typically a few things jump out. And this is where you can have a conversation around, well, what is the willingness to try to capitalize on these opportunities?
Okay. One other question that's come in, JP, is what metrics and measures have you taken into consideration at the team value stream level through the journey?
Okay, I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but let me try a few things. And if I don't answer the question, maybe you can ask the person to augment a little bit. So it always starts with customer value, right? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? So we always try to find the customer, which we define as someone who has money to give us and who has the optionality of doing business with us or not, right? So not captive customers. And then we work backwards from there to where the ideas that the team is working on, where do they come from? So that's how we define what the value stream is. And then in terms of assessing the value stream, then we look at the lead time, right? The idea is how long do they wait before they get executed, and once they get under execution, how long does it take until we get feedback as to whether those ideas are as juicy as we thought they were. So I don't know if that answers it, but
okay.
I'll keep it there. Yep.
This next one has a couple parts to it, I guess. So one part of it is looking back now, what would you have done differently? And given that, what advice would you give to someone embarking on a transformation journey?
All right. What would I have done differently? So let me see. I need to prune this down because there's probably 1,000 things that we tried and then we didn't work as well as we hoped. So I mentioned a couple in the presentation already. For example, when we started with part-time coaches and they didn't stick around very long, so we did take a hit on our transformational velocity by rehiring new coaches and training them internally and externally. And so that definitely slowed us down. Let me see. Some of the things I would have done. I love the way that we gave a lot of optionality to different teams to pick their agile methods, their practices, right, on the basis of education and these VFQ principles. I still wish that when we engage with these very teams new to transformation, that we gave them maybe what I call some safe defaults, as in try this method for a little while, and after you have some actual results under your belt, and you're speaking from a place of not just education, but also experience, then please, by all means, take charge of your own process and fine-tune it to your likings, to your current work context, to the people involved, and so forth. But I think we probably spun our wheels just a little bit more than we wanted, letting teams debate for too long between different methods at a time where they just didn't have the experiential background to make good choices. Let me see. Another thing I would have done differently, our executives became very enthusiastic very early in this, and they were frequently asking things that were different flavors of, hey, how could we jump straight to the end? And while I said no to some of those things, I didn't say no to all of them. And I remember an instance of an early planning session where this concept of bringing all the stakeholders together to make choices about relative priority sounded very appealing to a lot of people. And once we got to that meeting, it dawned on me that we had the 35 most senior people in the company, almost 100% of whom did not have any Agile education. This was in the very early days. And so as you can imagine, the conversation did not go very well. And so that's one thing I wish I had said no to. And maybe lastly, the last thing I'd like to share here, we promoted autonomy very early on in our squads. And that was the right thing to do, I still believe. But one thing that we could have emphasized a little bit more is the tremendous responsibility that comes with this autonomy. We are now catching up to that level of responsibility, but I think at first people, the makers, were really enthusiastic about having control over their destiny, but maybe had forgotten a little bit about what it means now to be totally responsible for the consequences of your choices. And when you're early in a transformation, the feedback loops between those who decide and those who have to confront the consequence are not always super well established. And so I think that enabled us to go a little bit longer than we should have gone with autonomy without the same level of responsibility. So hopefully that makes sense.
It does, thank you. Couple more that have come in.
I'm sorry, Alex, I just realized there was a second component to your question. You were asking me what advice do I have. So these are things that I would have done differently. They may or may not apply to everybody's context. Something else just jumped to my mind. Some advice. If you're a transformational agent, embarking again in this transformation, if you're part of that, it's probably going to take longer and be harder than you wish it was going to be. So like any other team embarking into a big initiative, we had some ups and we have some downs along the way. And maybe that's inevitable, but I think it's about make sure that you have a strong enough core belief that there's value in that pursuit so that you can withstand the natural zigs and zags. And this is where I think it's so important to get executive support and management support early on, be it in team coaching or all the way up at the corporate transformation, so that they understand what is happening. Because when you launch into this, you may sense a lot of pushback from a lot of people. Just know that it's probably not principled pushback. It's probably simply people who have not been communicated to sufficiently, who have not been educated, and so it's easy to conflate pushback with simply a simple lack of education. Once people understand what you're trying to achieve and how, and that you're doing so responsibly, I'm assuming you're doing so responsibly, then usually that increases the level of support and reduces the level of fear. But that's an area that is easy to under-invest in as a transformational agent.
That's great. JP, what was the largest team involved, and did you use any particular method or framework for scaling up to multiple teams?
Well, let me see. In the traditional sort of white-collar type roles, or the creative economy, right, or the knowledge type work, we have about 1,000 people, and I don't think we have a lot of teams who are not somewhere on their transformational journey. So that to give a sense of scales. If we mean teams as in squad level, we try to keep those as small as possible. Sometimes our value streams challenge that notion a little bit. And so I think the majority of our teams are in the single digits, but we do have some that are a little bit bigger than that, simply for reason of having the right representation of skills along the way.
Okay, and was there a potential, or is there a potential downside to Agile coaching?
Let me see. So you're asking me if what I do for a living is potentially not valuable. No, I kid, of course. Is there a downside to Agile coaching? So I'm going to not touch upon all the upsides of having Agile coaching, but yeah, there is a downside. And the downside is that coaches, as they embark with a team, if coaches are not careful to learn what the actual work is, not the transformational work, but the delivery work, and if they're not careful to build relationships with the team, and if they're not careful to empathize with the challenges, and if they don't show up as caring about actual delivery, then a coach could come across as being detached and speaking, sort of from the mountaintop, and being insensitive to the difficulties, right? The natural and perfectly expected difficulties of what people are facing, right? Because nothing is ever as clean as it is in the books. And so it's very important for coaches to not come across as being pedantic, because if they do so, then people will say, yeah, this Agile stuff is great in theory, but you can't apply it in reality. And so on that basis, maybe it's not as valuable as we think. So that's probably the danger there, is coaches have to show up as having skin in the game, just the same as team members.
Okay, and we have time for a couple more questions. One of our guests is asking, what centralized decisions were made up front? And can you tell us more about what changed as the transformation progressed.
Right. So I did mention a couple really quickly in a timeline. So when we had just a few results under our belt, the executives felt comfortable with making a commitment to agility in technology at first. And that is in part because I think there's quite a bit of industry experience now. It's relatively straightforward. But at the time, we weren't comfortable making such a declaration for other functions where there is a lot less material available out there and many fewer case studies. And you can see that that decision changed in the span of 2 years, right? Where in 2016, we've made a full commitment across the whole company. So that is a centralized decision, right? So the optionality of embarking on a transformation, it was optional through 2016, and now it is no longer. Let me see. The KPIs, right? So the main one, the lead time to market, that was decided centrally. There could have been other choices, but ultimately we said, we need a common basis to evaluate those things, so that was one. And along the way, I think our stance on different roles has also evolved. And what I mean by that is, I remember the first few facilitators or scrum masters that we had did not have an official role or job or title, or so to speak, right? They were typically engineers or project managers or people with a knack for that kind of skill and a passion, and they were willing to educate themselves. And along the way, eventually we said, okay, well, we have enough of those people, and we get feedback that is positive enough that we want to institutionalize this role for those teams who believe they need one, and provide some structure so that our employees who play this awesome role for everybody else feel like they have a career path and a support structure and so forth. And so we have institutionalized that. So again, that was a change in stance where at first it was like, well, let's see what happens. And once it became obvious, then we provided some support in a frame. I'm sure there's a ton more, but those are the ones that come to mind.
That's great. And our last question before we sign off is, again, slightly two parts, but the question is around how are you sustaining the change now and continuously improving?
Yes. And so I think for us, we're squarely in the continuous improvement. Our ambitions far exceed merely sustaining what we've achieved so far. We are certainly not done, and there's a lot more opportunities that we're pursuing. So what are some of the things that we're doing? So as I briefly mentioned, we make sure that when we have new employees, that we give them an Agile foundation through training. We continue to pursue teams who so far have not had an opportunity to get deep coaching, so we continue to expand that. We use periodic team assessments. So there are some different tools out there, but the point is that every so often, approximately once a quarter, we do something that is more high level than a traditional retrospective, where teams tend to self-assess at what I call the meta level or the how we work level, how things are going. And then after we anonymize the data and we're able to consolidate around bigger organizations, then we can see our sort of a heat map of where we have some friction or what is going really well. And so that keeps our feet to the fire. And then, of course, the other thing that sustains, if you will, the transformation is that now we have, I think, all the levels inside the company fully engaged. I showed what we call our enterprise visibility room, right? This enterprise Kanban board, and so we have the language now fully embedded, the language of increments and value and feedback and optimizing flow and being mindful of work in progress and what have we discovered recently in market. That is now embedded in the vernacular of the company.
That's great. Thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for making time to join us today. I just want to mention two important things before we say goodbye. When today's webinar ends, you'll have the opportunity to complete a very quick survey. We'd love your feedback so we can keep improving these webinars. So if you can take a couple minutes to share your views, that would be very helpful to us. Also, if you want to share today's webinar with a colleague or even listen to it again, we'll be sending out the recording in the next day or so. So again, I just want to thank you. JP, I want to thank you also. I thought you did a great job. It was very informative, and thank you for being transparent, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you very much.